Hey everybody, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to cover global illumination and how you can use an HDRI to completely light your scene using the physical renderer inside of Cinema 4D. Let's learn how. Alright, so this is the scene we're going to be lighting today. Now this scene I just used global illumination and an HDRI image to light. So no lights were used to light the scene, just global illumination and HDRI image. So let's go and just talk about just how that works. So let's go ahead, and if we go into our content browser here, we have all these presets, and for anyone who has any version of Cinema 4D, we can navigate to the Prime folder, and we have some presets, and we have light setups, and then there's HDRI. And we have a whole bunch of HDRI images here. And this is really awesome. So how HDRI images and global illumination works is it uses the light data, the luminance data of an image, of an HDRI image, to help light a scene. So the lighter spots of the image will actually emit a light, and the darker parts of that image basically won't emit very much light. So you can see in most of these images we have this bright spot where the sun is, and then some are more less contrasty, so the sky's a little bit more flat. So all this stuff can totally change how your scene looks. So these are HDRI images that we all have if you have your Prime content browser data here. So we'll come back to this later. But what I want to do is just kind of set up my scene and set it up for using global illumination and all that good stuff. So you can see that these materials right now are just using diffuse color channels, just colors loaded up in the color channel here. So we need to spice that up a little bit. But what I first want to do is go and just create a new view panel, and I'm just going to dock it right under here, and then make this a little bigger there. And then we're just going to go and choose, with this panel selected, I'm just going to go to interactive render region. And what this will allow us to do is see what this rendered project file will look like when it's fully rendered. I'm just going to make sure this little triangle is set up to the top so it's full quality. And you can see that, this is giving us a nice preview of what this is going to look like when it's rendered. Very flat, very boring. So what we're going to do is first, let's go ahead, and this is all about getting nice lighting and global illumination using the physical renderer. So what I'm going to do is just switch over to physical renderer here. Not much is going to change, but I just like using the physical renderer because it's a little bit more physically accurate. Well, at least that's the whole thing. It's more physically accurate with its calculations, its lights, its global illumination, its shadows, its reflections, all that good stuff. So now with that changed, while we're in here, let's just go ahead and add ambient occlusion to get some nice realistic shading. You can see we have some nice defined contrast between where these images are touching. And what I'm going to do is you need to be a little bit judicious with how big this maximum ray length number is, because it's how far out the ambient occlusion looks to see if it's going to bump into another object and create more shading. So what I'm going to do is just lower this, because 100's pretty overkill for this scene. And you can even see if I make a cube here that's 200 by 200 by 200, if I just make this 100 by 100 by 100, which was the default maximum ray length, you can see that's fairly big. So 30, if I just do 30 by 30 by 30, you can see that's much smaller, but you can still get the nice definition on our objects there. You can see that nice, all of our nice edges that are touching the floor. We got this really nice, realistic, real-life shading going on there. We can even change the color here too, to maybe something a little lighter, maybe a little bluish gray, so it's not so dark. So that helps a little bit. All right, so now let's go back to our materials. And again, our scene's still looking pretty drab. Let's go and add some nice reflections to our material. So I'm just going to go and check on reflectance and just add a Beckman reflection. So I don't have any specular whatsoever. I'm just going to use just straight up reflections because specular is basically a fake reflection, right? So you're going to see that everything that was blue, that had that blue texture in my scene, is now black. We got this really nice reflection of this little torus here reflecting onto this little part of this Nintendo Switch, this abstract Nintendo Switch I got going on here. So to actually get our color channel back in here, we need to change the attenuation to additive. And if you actually had multiple layers on here, you would actually need to do add on this this little layer menu here too. But since this is the only thing we have here, we don't really have to do that. So we have 100% reflection strength, and that's a little bit overkill. And we also don't need specular strength either. So we're just going to turn that down. So let's just bring down this reflection strength, say 60. And that's looking a little bit better. Our reflections are a little bit less, but this is too much like a piece of glass. And what I'm going for is more like a vinyl toy kind of texture, something along those lines. So a vinyl toy texture is a lot more blurred of a reflection. And you can see, if I give it a roughness of like 25, you can see that nice reflection gets blurred. And this looks a lot more like some kind of vinyl toy. Another thing I want to do is go into the layer color here and change the color of that reflection to maybe be a little bit more blue. So to match the color of the color channel of this material, you can see that kind of tampers down our reflection a little bit. We can even just play around with the roughness as well. So maybe 30 and 65. I think that's good. So that looks good for this material, and it's not going to look too impressive just yet because, again, we're just reflecting everything in the scene, and we're not using an HDRI image, because when you bring in an HDRI image, that's an image that all of your objects can reflect. So that adds a lot more detail and nice little reflective bits to our objects. So right now we're just reflecting the other objects in our scene. So let's just go ahead and add a Beckman reflection to this as well. Get rid of the specular. Make that additive, so we add on top of the color channel. Again, we'll do a roughness of 30 and a reflection strength of 60. And we'll see this update, and you can see the nice marble material reflecting onto our object as well. Really nice grainy reflection here that we can also, you know, if we later on down the line, we can up the blurriness subdivision to smooth that out, but I won't mess around with these physical renderer settings just yet. And then we can go into our color and make this reflection color just a little bit pink. Just give it a little bit of a hue. And you can even see that update in our little reflection preview. So that kind of tampers that down a little bit. Same thing with our black material. Go grab a Beckman. Bring down the specular roughness to 30 to 60. And then for the color, maybe just bring that down a little bit as well. And actually for this material, this is going to be our floor material, and I think that reflection is a little bit too much, so I'm just going to bring down the reflection just a little bit. So I don't want it to be too overpowering. So maybe something like that. I think that looks pretty good. We got this nice reflection of this red material, this red object right here. So we got some nice details already popping in. And then for my silver material, which is going to be applied to these little tube elements here, I'm simply not going to even use a color channel. I'm just going to use full on reflection with Beckman and just kind of leave it at that. Just have full reflection, maybe bring it back a little bit, maybe 90% reflection strength. And once this updates, you'll see that this tube, these little tube elements in this scene, are just going to be fully reflective, and they don't look too silvery right now, but it's all about, reflections are all about what is your environment. They look as good as the environment that you're in. So right now we're just kind of in a vacuum where the only things in our scene are the other objects. So this is where, bringing in our HDRI image, will really come in handy. So to do that, let's just go and grab a few of these images, see which ones will work best, which have some pretty cool details. What about, let's grab this just grassy field. Let's go create a new material, and we're going to load this up in our Luminance. We're just going to drag that into our Luminance there. So here's our little field, and so that can be one. So for this to actually light our scene, we need to place this HDRI image in our Luminance channel. And let's just duplicate this, and let's load up another one. Let's try this one. So I just want to get a few HDRI images in here, and this is, I don't know what that is, like a bay or something. And I'll duplicate this again, and let's open this one, and let's grab this one, this little HDR. It's like looks like a park or something like that. So we got 3 different images, and let's just, for posterity, let's grab this one. This one looks really cool. So I'll duplicate this again. And you know, typically with HDRI images, it's good to just test what each of these things do, because everything is such a completely different image, different colors, different light sources, different spots where the luminance is going to be coming from. And, you know, you just don't know what's going to look good. So I might come back to that area there. So now to actually have this reflect onto the objects in our scene, we're not quite using the HDRI to light our scene yet, because we don't have Global Illumination turned on. We'll create a sky. And just bring this to the top here. And what we're going to do is simply just place one of these HDRI images that are loaded up in the Luminance channel and just apply that to our sky. And our sky is basically just a giant sphere. And you can see that because of our reflections, it looks like our sky is lighting our scene, but it's actually not lighting it at all. It's just being a source of reflections. So you can see that image being reflected there. Now let's go ahead, and again, the image is going to change completely what this is looking like, even with the reflections. Let's just switch this with the bay image there. And you can see that this is a little bit more muted. It's not as bright. The sky is not as bright as you can see in our little preview image here. And then we have a few less colors in here, so a little bit more muted colors. Our sky is more blue, so we're going to get a little bit more blue-ish hue reflections in here. I'm actually liking that image a little bit more. So from this point, now we're just using our HDR image to be a reflection source. Okay, so what we need to do actually to use this HDRI image to help light our scene, because right now we're just using a default light. And if we go into our options here, we can just turn off default light. And you can see that our default light is off, and now we're just seeing our reflections right there. So default light's off, no light source whatsoever, just reflections. And now what we can do is go and turn on Global Illumination. And we're just going to use the defaults for right now. And what you're going to see is that we have a couple primary methods here. QMC and a Radiance Cache. Radiance Cache is the one that I use the most. You can see all these little samples in the cache going on right here, all these little dots. And basically what it does is it tries to average the light source information from the HDRI to light your scene. The other method here, the quasi Monte Carlo, is a little bit more accurate, but the render time goes up. And that's typically why I use the Radiance Cache. And you can see that now we added no lights to our scene, but our scene is now lit. And not in the slang way. Well, maybe in the slang way. It's lit and actually lit. So we can do a few things. Number one being where we can actually go into our HDRI image here. And if we want to brighten this up, we can go ahead and change this mix mode to multiply, and then just crank up the brightness here. And you can see that's actually brightening up our scene because we're multiplying on top of a bright white color. You can see that's going to help brighten up our scene. Probably make this be a little bit blown out there too. So I'll just bring this down. Another thing we can do is with this set to multiply mode, we can make this darker. Something like that. Or we can even go and grab a filter and maybe introduce some contrast as well. So you can have a lot of flexibility with your HDRI image in here. See what that looks like. And we can even introduce a hue to this as well to give it a blue cast if we just change the color here. Something like that. So we'll see what this looks like. So we got a nice blue hue there. Looking pretty good, but you can see it's very subtle. But we can tell where the light source or where this bright highlight is coming from if we just go ahead, and what I like to do is just grab a sphere, boop, and just apply that HDRI image onto the sphere, and you can see where that light source or where that sun is. It's right here. So our light source is actually coming from the top left here. And if we wanted to change that, we would just be able to just offset this and say, let's have the light source come here, or we can offset it up and down. That would be weird though, so we're not going to change that. But let's just change the offset to like 30 in the U and have our light source over here. So I'll just deactivate the sphere and just place 30 in our offset of the texture on our sky. So now we should see a little bit of a change here of where our bright light source is on our scene, or on our objects here. So you can see a little bit more brighter light coming from this area instead of the top left area here. So we'll just let this go here a little bit. So that's looking pretty good. So say we want to, one of the great things about Global Illumination is right now, if I go to my render settings here, by default, we just start with a primary method. And what this means is that there's one type of Global Illumination light being cast right now, one bounce of light. So once a object, or once this light ray hits the object, it just kind of bounces back to the light source and then it gets lit. And we can introduce a secondary method that does 2 or more bounces. So it's a little bit more realistic lighting. And we can go ahead and choose something like light mapping. Now, this is just my preference, but I usually like to do, if I want to do more than just one bounce of light, I'll do irradiance cache, which is fast, and I'll do light mapping, which is also fast as well. And what you can see is that it'll brighten our scene and it'll have more bounces of light. So what'll happen is in like nooks and crannies, the light will bounce once and then bounce twice, and we'll have like indirect illumination going on. So the darker parts of our image will get a little bit more brighter. And again, in real life, you have a lot of bounces of light in your scene. If you just look in your room and the sun coming through your window, that light is bouncing a ton. It's lighting different parts of your room in many different ways, and brightening up little nooks and crannies of your room, right? So here we go. We got our light mapping going, and this maximum depth is basically telling us how many bounces or how much that depth of that light goes. So the lower the depth, the maximum depth, say like 4, it's gonna speed up the render. So that's another thing, is when you have more bounces of light, that's more calculations, that's more render speed. Let me just bring the samples down to low just to speed up our little render here. So you can see that, hopefully you can tell that because we have a lower maximum depth, our light is not traveling as far or bouncing as much, so our darker areas are a little bit darker. one thing, let's just keep in mind that how dark this center part of that torus is. So hopefully you guys saw that. So let's bring the maximum depth to 32 instead of 16. And then what you should notice is that the little holes in the torus will be brighter, and as well as the other parts of our scene. So you can see that indeed the little part of the little donut hole in our torus is a lot lighter because we have more bounces of light that are entering inside of that torus, and all that good stuff. So another thing we can do in addition to just maximum depths and get the bounces of light to reach little nooks and crannies and underneath our objects by changing this maximum depth is adjusting this gamma. And what the gamma allows you to do is basically up the mid-range values and kind of brighten your scene overall without having the light areas get blown out. So typically how I like to work is use a gamma of like 2.2, and what you're going to notice is that this is going to bump up those, brighten up those mid-gray values. So this is like gamma in After Effects as well. So you're going to see it's going to look a little bit more gray. And what this allows you to do is be a little bit more flexible when it comes to compositing your scene and doing some curves adjustments and stuff like that. So you can see how much flatter our gamma looks, but we have a lot more information, a little more grayscale information to make curves adjustments. And if I change this back to 1, you'll see that there will be a little bit more contrast and therefore a little bit less brightness information to be able to do those curves adjustments and stuff like that. So you're going to see got a little bit more contrast there. So gamma, very important as well. If you want to kind of up the gamma value to be able to add some contrast in post and stuff like that. Let's see. Another thing we can do here is go into our physical renderer settings and maybe up the blurriness subdivision, because right now our blurred reflections are a little bit grainy. So I always like to up the blurriness subdivisions. And typically what I like to do, and it depends on every scene, but typically what you want to do is just start at low and then just start changing these values and seeing the differences between what these values do and the render hit. How long does that take to render? So a value I like to start with is like 4, 2, and 4, and kind of go from there and try to work my way down and see the render hit as well as the quality loss. But again, just for speed reason, I'm sure you don't want to see this keep calculating every time I do this. I think for speed reasons, once this actually does its thing, you can see our shadows are way more smooth and looking really nice. Our sampling, everything looks a little bit more crisp, and our reflections are looking really good as well. So you can see there's really nice reflections on our marble, and I just screwed it up. So I'm just going to go back to low, and it's the same thing with Global Illumination, where another thing is if you want to just crank up the intensity of the lightness of your scene, or the saturation of the colors in your image, you can crank this up to get a lot more color information in there. We can just bring up the intensity of this light as well, so it's going to light our scene a little bit brighter. And again, the same thing where with this different kind of methods and samples and stuff, you can kind of just see how this renders out at. Start at the lowest and just start working up a little bit and seeing, because sometimes if you have a low sample rate, it looks perfectly fine. You can see that saturation value that we changed, you can see that blue of the sky is much more saturated, and kind of looks cool, but that's just too overkill. So let's just bring the saturation down to 100. Again, we can do the same thing with the secondary method of the lights bouncing and stuff like that. And let's bring the maximum depth down a little bit too, so we can get faster render. I think I'm just going to turn off the ambient occlusion as well, just so we can keep speeding this sucker up. So there we go. So that intensity's a little bit bright. You can definitely see on our marble right here in our image that it's a little bit hot. So maybe don't want to mess around with the intensity too much. So maybe 110. And what I want to demonstrate is, again, everything changes depending on what the image is that you're using for your HDRI. So let's let this finish again here. Got this render in. So you can see the lighting that is being cast onto our scene via Global Illumination using this Bay HDRI. So you can see what that's looking like. And let's just switch this out for the park. So I'll just place this park HDRI image. You can already tell that this image, if I go and right click on this and change this to a plane, you can see how bright that sky is compared to the bay, where we have a little bit more blue hue. So it's a little bit more blown out of an HDRI than the last one we used. So let's just let this finish here. And again, it's looking like the light source is coming from the right side of our composition. You can see how bright that is. But you can see that's just completely different. So now with this image to work, we'll probably need to go into our render settings and in our irradiance cache, maybe bring the intensity down to 60. And let's see if that kind of tampers that down a little bit. You can already see in the little pre-cache, again, that's the whole irradiance cache, uses a cache method of lighting your scene. You can see that's still pretty hot, but you can see the different type of light that is being cast in our scene due to that new image. So again, we can totally change where that bright spotlight is, that hot spot in our image. If we go and we see, okay, this is where it is now. Let's go to our sphere and go to our material offset here, and let's see, maybe we want the light to come from the top left over here. So that's a offset of like -4. Turn off our sphere and do -4 here as well. And what you're going to notice, and you can already see on our pre-calculation, that the light source is up here, which is really cool. So again, you're lighting your scene with HDRI image. And that light source is also going to cast shadows as well, which is really, really cool. So not a single light in this scene. You can really see that blown out highlight is coming from the left now. So every image is different. Every image you need to tweak a little bit of things to make it look, to make it light your scene right. So let's use the inside of the building here for contrast here. So let's just open this up and see what this image looks like. So we got this plane. Let's go and open this window. So you can see that in contrast with these other images where the sky is at the top and that's where the bright light sources are, the sunlight sources are. You can see that with this image though, the light sources are coming from more the middle of our scene and not the top, or the top of our image. So we can see what this looks like. Let this go here. You can even see that's a little bit darker because most of our objects are reflecting that top of this building. But you can definitely see from the right side of our scene, there's like a little light source. So that must be where one of those doors are, with the bright light streaming into this room. This really cool building, whatever that is. It looks like a Japanese house. So again, I think we still have our intensity pretty low, so we can crank this up. Maybe bring up the saturation to 120 as well. Let's see what that looks like. And again, we can always go to our texture tag on our sky and adjust the UV or the U offset as well to change where that light is coming from. So let's just go ahead and do that because it looks like our light is coming from over here. Let's apply this building material to our sphere. You can see where that light's coming from. So let's go and try to position this so maybe the light's coming from this way. So we get a light source coming from the bottom part of our image. So let's go and change that to, so we got negative 43 offset. So we'll change this to negative 43 as well. And see, even in the pre-calculation, where that light source changes. So you can already see that in the cache calculation. So I think this image is a little bit too dark for me. What you would probably need to do with something like this is add some more just manual lights to brighten everything up. And just for comparison, let's go ahead and let's just use this this image here. It's a little bit more abstract, or more, not abstract, but more of a typical like studio lighting. So let's go ahead, we'll duplicate. So this will be studio lighting. So just to get a huge contrast from these actual images, go and place this Studio 21 and just apply this to both our sky and our sphere. You can see that there's no actual hue values in this studio light. It's all grays and whites, bright whites. But actually this studio lighting's pretty cool because you can get some pretty interesting highlights on your objects, and it's a little bit more predictable as far as where your light source are coming from, because they're actually, like light tents and spotlights that are in the studio light setup. So that's pretty cool. Another thing I like to do is to maybe try to punch up the values and maybe even have some of these textures emits a little bit of luminance, is to actually go into these textures, turn on the luminance, and maybe just bring up the luminance brightness a little bit. So these will actually cast a little bit of some hues to our scene. If we really crank this up, you'll be able to tell what's going on. Let's see what that looks like. So you can already see some of that pink being cast because now our objects have some luminance, and they're also going to be used as a little bit of a light source by the Global Illumination, or at least be brighter in our image. So you can see on our marble on the top right there that a lot more of that red hue is coming in. So this is a cool way to get like some kind of like light spills of these objects onto the objects surrounding it. So that's looking really cool. So let's just go back to, I think the one I like the most was this bay. And I believe let's just bring this back to, actually I liked a little bit of a blue hue. And let's bring down the contrast. And let's turn back on our ambient occlusion. And let's just see what this looks like and just do like a final render. Let's go back and let's see what kind of settings we have here. Let's do 8 for the maximum depth. Let's just keep gamma for 1 for right now because I'm not concerned with compositing at this point. And let's just see what this looks like. So already I can see that everything's a lot brighter and looking pretty good. And again, I probably would want to rotate where that sun is on my image on my sky object. So maybe do a little bit of an offset there, because right now it's in the top left. So let's actually just zero out the luminance. Let's grab this texture tag here. There we go. And just zero that out. And now our light's coming from the bottom right here. We'll just let this go. So a lot of this is just playing around. I mean, you already notice I'm doing a lot of tweaking. I'm using a lot of different HDRI images to try to get the look that I'm going for, and stuff like that. If you want less light bounces, if you want things to be a little bit more contrasty, maybe you don't even have a secondary method to make even more bounces of that light. So everything's kind of like a push and pull, you know, maybe even introducing some luminance to your materials on your object. So let's just change this to none. Primary method, let's just do 100, and let's just see what 200 looks like. In the irradiance cache, we have these settings here to go preview low, and then smoothing, which is basically like smoothing out all these samples. So if you have some splotchiness when you render, crank up the smoothing, crank up the record density, so there's a lot more samples being cast, and you can see that saturation is a little overkill, so I'll just bring that to 100. And then these options for our physical renderer as well. So we can just let's just bring this down. Actually, one thing that is super huge to speeding up your render lives in the options tab. One thing I really like to do if a render's taking too long is adjust a few things in our options here. So ray threshold, ray depth, reflection depth, and shadow depth. Sometimes I even like to crank up the reflection depth to just have way more bounces of reflection. So what I'll do is maybe do 10 for reflection depth and maybe have less rays, less shadow depth, and then bring up this ray threshold. And what that does is basically the ray threshold has all these rays bounce at very low values, and a lot of details are picked up in that ray threshold. But if you just crank it up a little bit to say 3% instead of 0.1%, it speeds up your render. You do lose some of the ray details, but when you're using global illumination for an animation render, saving 10 seconds a frame adds up over, you know, a 30-second animation. So always play around with those values as well, because a lot of these things, these ray thresholds, you can change it and it can speed up your render, and you can see no visible difference in your render. So just keep that stuff in mind. So that is how you can use the physical render and optimize using some of these settings, using ambient occlusion, and also optimizing the ray length settings. Global illumination, using the primary method or the secondary method if you want more bounces of light to reach more of the nooks and crannies of your scene and be a little bit more realistic lighting. And then we also always have these presets that we can start from. So this is an interior, so we could always see what that looks like. And this is just a low preview, so you can already tell that radiosity maps are just pretty much good for preview. Light mapping is typically what I'll go to after. And then if we have an exterior scene, like this is an exterior, but maybe we have an exterior with an HDR image, you can see the types of global illumination that are used, and then you just tweak from there. So these are really, really good starting points to start to get what you're doing. So the typical setup I like to use is this interior high diffuse depth. And again, we're using that irradiance cache, and then that secondary is that light mapping. And those are the combination of the two fastest type of global illumination methods. So I like to use those two and then just tweak from there. So here we go. We'll let this finish up, and hopefully you guys have a little bit more information to be able to just use HDRIs to light your scene and have a lot of fun and make cool abstract renders like this, or any kind of renders, using global illumination and physical renderer. Alright, so that is just scratching the surface of global illumination, physical renderer, and HDRIs. So we covered a lot of stuff. We went over how to make nice blurry kind of vinyl textures and completely reflective textures like metal silver textures. Then we learned how we can use an HDRI image to get that luminance information and use it to light a scene using global illumination and the physical renderer. And then we wrapped it up with a nice little bow and showed you a little bit about how you can optimize your scene using a few settings in the physical renderer settings, as well as global illumination. If you have any questions about anything I covered in this tutorial, please leave a comment in the comment section. I'll try to answer it as best as I can. And if you like this tutorial, I would appreciate if you hit the like button. I'd really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you all out there watching this tutorial. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye, everybody.